People that are not capable of voting properly are able to vote because of their ages in the status quo. Oftentimes, voters make wrong or irrational choices due to personal emotions or by the lobbying of the politicians. The minimum age is 18 years old. However, often governments use this requirement because they believe that age determines knowledge and better judgment. If we prove that this is not true, and knowledge can come from the diverse perspectives, finally, and that this is good for the society, we win the debate. Our model is, let me explain to you about our model. What is a basic political literacy test? This doesn't require high knowledge of how the political system actually works or hard study or of politics. This test is to test rather if you know that your decisions should be based on logic and proper thinking, not on arbitrary thoughts. We will make this exam mandatory for all people once in 5 years to constantly check their capacity. Let me move on to the first argument. It's about proper voting. The right to vote should be belong to those who can understand the choice, and age is a crude and arbitrary proxy for that capacity. Before moving on to our first argument, are there any POIs? Three, two, one. Assuming, yes.
So do you just assume that just because they pass the test, it means that they know everything that about voting and like do you not know that like these parents can
Okay,
control
I
them?
get your point about those things. However, we think that in our side it is very exclusive because your side you say, oh, if you get over 18, that it's okay. It's better to take actual tests, and our side is exclusive than your world. So if you weigh the both sides, it's not symmetrical. Let me move on to the first point of our first argument. Why is improper voting an issue in the status quo? People have more incentives on money and personal emotions. They listen to promises that benefit only themselves, not judge the politician from a just vision. Politicians persuade irrational voters through money or promotions through personal relationships. But then why do we actually need the test? Even if voters are very old or have a lot of experiences, this also actually innately responds to your POI. They might not know the trend of politics in the modern society, and they're likely to be trapped in only individual thinking or concepts of the past that are very conservative. Why does the test bring proper voting? Because the test asks you about the standards that you have to have in mind as a proper voter. People will most likely study for these tests or at least have attention. They would have the incentive to vote because they want their opinions to be considered by their leaders, which makes me care more about what makes elections proper. They will fix standards like money or this corrupted principles. They will likely have a bigger vision of the society and be more tolerant. When we issue a basic politics literacy test, people can share diverse perspectives also. Age doesn't mean knowledge. Actually, passing a test means that you're eligible to vote for your country because we make them know more about those correct standards, not corrupted principles. Not only does this mean that adults actually have to take a test every 5 years to make sure they're eligible to vote, young voters can express their thoughts by voting. This means that young minorities that are often excluded by politicians can be a part of politics, voting for policies that help them and make the society a better place for young people too. This is especially important because nowadays young people don't have many rights in their own country, and sometimes this is harmful to minorities like the Black community. Now, what can be some other impacts? There will be more media attention to on these politics because more and more people will try to know more about them. Also, because they gain better perspectives, they'll try to consider the marginalized groups as well. Second argument, principle justification. Why, first of all, age is arbitrary. Why can it be 17 rather than 18? The opposition can never guarantee that an 18-year-old actually listened to their social studies class. Age most of the time has not much to do with maturity of knowledge because someone who was immature just can't turn suddenly mature and rational when they turn 18. This is very arbitrary. Secondly, we think that the government has the responsibility to protect all people. This includes young people. If they don't have to write for smart, logical young people to vote, this is justified too. We believe that the government has the duty to protect other people to express their thoughts too. Thank you for listening.
So, Judge, I'll start with some quick rebuttals, and then I'll present our team's two first argument. So, the rebuttal to the Prime Minister's first argument will be presented with my second argument, and although the Prime Minister said that in their impacts of of their first argument, in their impact said that there will be more media interest and that the young minority can be included now instead of being just excluded as it in status quo. However, that narrow sympathetic case is solved by lowering the age, not by just examining tens of millions of adults. Prop inflates like a small benefit just to justify a massive disenfranchisement risk. You do not like burn universal suffer to like enfranchise the exceptional teenager. instead of just like banning, instead of just like abolishing it completely, on our side, opposition can make small adjustments to fit to fit some more to fit something that the prop says. And the second argument said that the age is arbitrary, and that and then they're implicitly saying that competitors should rule. However, every workable right needs like a clean line, and the age is the least discriminatory one available. Like it's objective, universal, and ungameable. Competence is subjective and government defined, inviting exactly the manipulation prob ways away. Arbitrary but fair beats relevant but riggable. Now, first argument. It deals with basic rights. Voting is a basic right. That's so intuitive. So, what if a person does not pass a literacy test? They can't vote for another year, for another long time period. The vote belongs to everyone of the political community and because they all live under its laws and it's a basic right as a citizen. Democratic legitimacy comes from the citizens that govern every one of them, not only the ones who manage to pass the test. In Prague, voting must be earned by passing a state exam, and it becomes a privilege the state can withhold. Equal political stand is a very infrastructure that makes a democracy what it is, and a competitive test blocks that and ranks citizens against it. For example, like universal suffrage was like earned by abolishing tests, like property, literacy, character qualification were removed because they enshred the ones with power. Reintroducing a test reverses like centuries and centuries of hard-won, and that is what we are opposing to. What is the impact of this? Conditioning the vote destroys equal citizen rights, and the damage to democracy is deep while unraveling history's efforts. Before I move on to my second argument, I'll take that POI.
Then even if it's a universal right, if that causes like actual harm to the society, do you think that should be justified by the government?
Well, it is a basic right. There's a reason why basic rights are called basic rights. Like for example, when you like let's say let's say when you sleep or something, um and let's say that you're sleeping because you're so tired, but you need to go to like a meeting or something, that is causing like a little distress to other people. However, it is a basic right, so you shouldn't be like denied of it. If it's so basic, then if it's so basic, then why would it if it's not so basic and it should be like harm because it's a harm to other people, why is it called a basic right? Basic rights are called a basic right because it should be basic. Also, second argument. The info site states that the literacy test necessitates a basic understanding, and many people without that much knowledge can still pass and qualify. Just because they pass the test doesn't mean that they are knowledgeable to vote and perhaps pass. A basic test is filled with political knowledge that everyone who wants to vote already knows. Inside proposition, once you pass the test, you can vote freely because it shows that they have knowledge about political literacy. However, doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of having a test that if it is basic knowledge that everyone knows? And even if prop tells us that it's so basic, everyone can pass it and there's no inequality, then there's no point. It's the same effect as it is in the status quo of all people passing. Why is there a point of having that going to some procedures? So proud to oppose, sorry.
Before I start with my rebuttals, I'll start with a few extensions about why our side is better for the minorities. So first, we have mainly four reasons. A, we have more media attention. It becomes an issue when the government totally changes the vote, totally changes the vote system because it's a basic like knowledge of like democracy. So therefore, it will be a big issue, like especially on the media and stuff like that. So therefore, even minorities will have more incentive to vote and more incentive to study about this kind of vote. And also B, there will be more criticism inside the media that minorities will not get respect. So therefore, the public will be more focused on the minorities' opinions and minorities' rights. So therefore, some normal people will actually vote for these kind of minorities. And see, minorities will actually have hope that now people keep like the basic politics, which are like you need to like save the minorities. You yourself is privileged, so therefore you need to save the minorities. That is literally the basic of politics. So therefore, the kind of minorities who right now have no hope at all will actually have hope that these people will actually vote for them. So therefore, the minorities will have more incentive to study and be more engaged in these kinds of politics. And D, But however, I think even if we ignore all of these points, I think that still on our side we help these kind of minorities, because on their side, like I said before, these minorities have no hope that their opinions will actually be respected inside society. So therefore, on their side, they won't even vote or study or do anything at all. So therefore, at least in our side, people will actually, these kind of minorities will actually have it, even though they're not incentivized to actually jump in these kind of vote. I think that on our side it's still symmetrical, and then now the metric is like mainly principle and like what's actually better for the society. So this the LO started talking about how like started talking about like how voting is a basic right. But however, sometimes there are exceptions where these kind of basic right is violated. So a main example is organ selling, right? For example, organ selling, you have a basic right in the Constitution that like it's a basic right to control your own body. But however, for organ selling, a lot of countries ban this. Why is this true? Because it's actually harmful for themselves. Like this, some kind of basic rights are sometimes restricted by the government if they think that is harmful for the whole society and is harmful for themselves too. Like in this, I think this logic can be applied into the same in here too, because this kind of voting is actually harmful for themselves. They don't know what's best for them if they can't even pass this test. And also, if you have the basic right to do something, but it risks the society to be corrupted, this just cannot be justified. The amount of utility is maximized on our side, because even though like some people cannot vote and the basic right is violated, we think that it's still justified on our side, because the government has a responsibility to actually to keep the rights of the people who kept their basic responsibility as a citizen. This is because if they try too hard to keep the rights of people not even keeping their basic responsibility, then the opinions of people who actually keep their basic responsibility get shunned, right? So the people who actually keep their responsibility of knowing about the basics of politics, those kind of people are actually shunned on their side. I think that this is a much more unjustified society, and actually minimizes the kind of utility. And by the way, the Ella also stated as a rebuttal that if like in our side, if it's actually basic, some people will act that everyone will pass. Of course, this is not true. What our PM means by basic is that you about the basic education, like elementary school and middle school, the mandatory education. If you know the basic education, then you can pass this test. But however, literally, this actually rebuts their point about basic rights, because if you can't pass the test, this means that you didn't listen to any of your basic elementary and middle school social studies class, and so therefore that you didn't keep your basic responsibility as a student, as like a student, as a citizen, as about learning about your own country's like politics and like stuff like that. So therefore, that this means that you didn't keep your basic responsibility. Then you shouldn't, and then you shouldn't say to the government that, hey, I want to keep my right, when you actually didn't keep that kind of responsibility. Thank you.
So three things I'll do in my speech. Actually, two things I'll do in my speech. First, give some rebuttals and present our last arguments. So rebuttals to what the previous speaker mentioned in her speech. She said that like if basic rights are harmful, they shouldn't be allowed, and governments still restrict these basic laws. However, we believe that having a right and being bad is different, and basic rights, and even if it might be a bit harmful, basic rights, they still should be allowed, because they, as like, even in their name, it's called basic rights. It means that like everyone should have these rights, because it's actually the most basic thing, and and for example, like in the USA, there's like a right to bear arms, right? Meaning that they can have guns, but it can be harmful in some ways because it's dangerous, right? It's a gun, but the government still allows it because it's actually a basic law, right? So these are the reasons. And then she also said that like their side is more focused on minorities, and they can help the minorities like actually try to get voted. However, we believe that they didn't explain, and we believe that it still happens in both sides, and we believe that like just because there's some minorities, and just because they're like young people and like they're still like youth, doesn't mean that they're gonna choose like the minorities for like voting, right? So we believe that this point does not stand. And then also,
Why?
thank you. She also said that like the like newbies and like the kids are not gonna get influenced by like the government because of like lobbying or whatever. However, we believe that it's the opposite, and like they're more likely to get involved, like they're more likely to get influenced because they still have like these parents. They're like minors, which means that they're still like not independent to these parents, and they still get influenced by these parents, and even like politicians, right? So we believe that they get more influence. Now, moving on to our third argument, which is that it's unfair for the poor. Just proposition by changing to political tests does not like not only takes away the basic human rights, but also makes wealthy people pass easily. But on the other hand, poor people who didn't have enough education to actually have this, no thank you, no actually have enough education, not pass and actually fail this. So this because when poor and vulnerable people cannot vote, and this can lead to dangerous trap for the poor, because when poor and vulnerable people actually cannot vote, politicians will stop caring about them, right? And lawmakers or politicians will stop spending money on their neighborhoods and schools and their hospitals because they actually do not need their votes to win, right? This actually creates a trap that can actually last forever, right? If these vulnerable people fail the test because they had bad education, and their education stays bad, that they no longer can vote to fix it, their children can also suffer from the same problem, right? And this plan wants to to let a group of teenagers or like a young children vote, but to do that, it takes away the voting rights of millions of a lot of normal adults, like especially low income adults who actually already has the right and like the right to vote today. And even if the government says that they'll give free education, and then she also mentioned before that like voting is simple and easy, it means that more people can pass it, and it's not effective enough, and we believe that is actually unfair for the poor. Therefore, proud to propose. Thank you.
So first, I like to do some rebuttals before moving on to my clashes. So they talk about how normal people will not choose the minority. However, we think that even if this is true, that at least more people will opt in our world because they are more voting and they're studying for the test. And also the fact that more people are opting in means that more people have leverage over the politicians, and therefore it's more likely that these politicians will make more policies for these people. So they talk about how like children are influenced by parents in our world. However, we think it's unlikely from the start that minors under the age of 10 is likely to actually pass the test from the beginning. We're talking about those minors who are over like 16 or like over 15 or 16 who actually have the power to pass this test in the first place. Second, even if we do say that these the young people do pass this test, we think that the influence is symmetric on both sides, because in their side, the adults are still influenced by their society, by their parents, their friends. Therefore, the influence is symmetric. But we think that this is actually better on our side, because when people actually have the knowledge and they get the influence, they can judge whether this influence they're getting is right or wrong. So B, I think we can, and third, I think we can flip this by saying that maybe people getting influence on our side is better, because now that people are knowledge and they're actually I think they're getting they're talking to other people because there's more discourse. I think that means there'll be a lot more debates and things about how whether this policies are actually good. So moving on to our first class, what is principally right? I think both sides agree that vulnerable minorities like Black communities and young minors are the most important stakeholders. So the first thing I want to talk about is about the government's responsibility. So the government has to protect citizens and make a better country. And politicians often make policies that majorities like for the prestige. For example, they make policies for the prestigious people. We think this is bad because this is for the minorities disadvantage. So the reason why we help is because we let these diverse perspectives come out by making a test. The opposition says, oh, minorities are too poor to actually study, and therefore the policies will never be good. We think this is not true because A, the test is only basic thing. It's not really that hard. If you had paid attention to your country's history at school, obviously you would know and pass the test. B, if the government makes the policy, we think they're also likely to make other things. For example, like campaigns or educational systems to actually help the students and make them actually pass the test, because this is an obligation the government must fulfill, and therefore the society actually makes them do it. So see, even if this is true, there's still a few reasons why the majority has an incentive to actually help the minority. We think this is usually because the policies that are for minorities often are like building infrastructure or raising the economy of barren places. Therefore, we think that there's incentive that the majority also wants this too, because it makes society a better place. In their world, they're people over 18, and in the world, if people are over 18, and even if they have like only a little bit of knowledge, the politicians can still make policies that make these people biased and like vote emotionally. But in our world, at least this test means that politicians need to make policies for the knowledge people. The second, it's okay to limit citizens' right. So I think the government limits when it's needed or it's when to make a better society. Because for example, they limit people's freedom. They tell you have to wear a seatbelt, you have to not hit other people. Because even though it is your basic right, even if it is a basic right, if it's better for the society, we prove that it's okay for the government to limit this. So they talk about that our side is so the second class is about whose side is actually discriminatory. So they said like our side leads to discrimination, therefore corrupt government. We think this is not true because first, I think there's a lot of protection and balance that already exists in society because the government has already laws and regulations and these kind of democracy that a lot of that keeps the government in check because the politicians are acting for the citizens and because the citizens don't want this like corrupt government, obviously the politicians will also act to them. B, I think it's likely that their side is more corrupt because they said that they will slowly change the requirement. Therefore, this allows the government to become more corrupt over time, and because the citizens are not knowledge in the first place, it's more easier to actually let the government go corrupt. So why should we abolish this? Because this creates a bigger impact. We already told you that because there's a lot more media attention when the government does like changes a lot of things, and therefore when there's a lot of media attention, this leads more people to protect the minority and make better policies for them. So who actually makes a better society? When you weigh the happiness of people, we actually trade off the individual a little in the extent of individuals, right? But you can still study. I think the delta is not the people who don't study in our world because they don't have the time, because they will not vote in their world anyways. So the delta is the minority who actually cannot have power over majority in their world. So in our work, the more knowledge people and the media actually helps the minority. So even if it's not true, our worst case exists, and this is still better than their best case because the feeling that knowledge people are helping you actually makes you feel like a more hopeful, and therefore this is good for the minority.
So, things that I'll do, I'll first rebut to the previous speakers and I'll present my clashes. So first, moving on to the rebuttals, their first argument was about how the right should vote should only be for the people who like know how to vote and have enough knowledge about the about like the political literacy. However, I think that there's the proposition side is seeing in like voting as something that's very like right and wrong, right? However, we think that like voting, whether or not you're gonna vote or who you're gonna vote for or whether or not you're gonna vote in the first place is actually just like a human right, like we kept on talking about, and it's also actually just like a human right that we kept on talking about, and it's also oh just your opinion on protect time, your like opinion about like who you're going to vote for. So I don't think that their point stands on this. Secondly, their argument was about how age is arbitrary and 18-year-olds don't immediately become like knowledgeable like don't immediately become knowledgeable about the political literacy. However, yes, we agree, but passing a basic test also doesn't mean that you immediately become. So this is not exclusive and yes.
Do you think if your like actions are protected by your right and it causes harm to people and the society overall, is it justified? We keep asking you this question. Please answer.
But I don't think that voting for like a quote unquote like wrong person is necessarily like harming like anyone, right? And also if it's like quote unquote wrong, then like the people won't even like vote for it, and like the majority won't even vote for it, right? So, Judge, we think that like having this like basic test doesn't mean that you immediately become knowledgeable. And it's like literally the same thing as like holding a test to like drink when you're finally when you finally at the age too. Also, they said that they're going to make sure that people will understand and how to vote on logic. However, our side thinks that every political view is based on like point opinions and like their own like experiences, right? By logic, I don't really know what the proposition means because like voting is subjective, and that's why we even host the vote in the first place, right? Also they said that if you can't pass the test, you didn't focus in like elementary and middle school. However, Judge, this only shows how simple and basic the test is, and people who like and most people who like pass this who's past like 18 and like 18 and over went to elementary and middle school, right? And if they didn't have the knowledge and interest, then they wouldn't even like vote in even like attempt voting in the first place, right? So now moving on to the clashes. Our first clash, the clash is that it's like which side actually gives the like opinion and like right to to the citizens. Now like for the wing, so on the proposition side, people who passed will be only people who passed like the really easy like basic political literacy test will be happy because they could vote. However, on our side, everyone can vote from because I think that if you're over because I think that if you are 18 or over, you at least have like some sort of idea on like what political stand you are on and like what political viewpoint you're like believing in. And because of like because of family and like because you always see like your family like talking about like political like viewpoints, and it is very hard to like and also it is very hard to like avoid these like political literacy. So I think that the test, so our position side thinks that the test is unnecessary and we are never been prouder to oppose. Thank you.
So three things. So as an opposition reply, I'd like to give you some flaws that the government side mentioned, and I'd like to prove to you why our side takes this debate. So first of all, the opposition's main case was that they give more proper voting to minors, and like they help minors express their thoughts more, and like yeah, and then the voting is like very simple and easy to pass. It's kind of like elementary history class. However, we believe that there are multiple flaws to this. However, so we believe that it's true that they give proper voting right to minors. However, we believe that proper voting right is not needed to minors because minors get influenced a lot, and they're sure there might be some minors who are like ready and some minors who are like excelling in like understanding politics, but most minors they're not. The truth is most minors are not, right? So these minors they get influenced by like these parents a lot and other people, and then they also said that like they also said like if they also said like the minorities are gonna get like more focused and like gonna be able to vote. However, as our side rebutted before, if like it still happens on both sides, and they also said that like they're not gonna do they're not gonna make these people be like too young. They're gonna make the voting age to like there most of the people are gonna vote is like 16 or 14. However, we believe that as our first speaker mentioned, there if we're gonna just lower the voting age to like 16 or 13 or like less, it means that there's no need to do like pass this specific policy and create this maximum harm. So we believe that we're proud to propose. Thank you.
Judge, the opposition is relying on the sole principle that voting is a basic right and it is discriminatory. When we issued about the high possibilities of power abuse when voters don't have the capacity to determine moral decisions, they never directly engaged on these points. They just said that it doesn't necessarily cause harm when there's power abuse. Is it justified to keep your rights when it risks the whole society to be harmed? Isn't it the government's duty to prevent corruption of the leaders in the country? There are two main issues in this debate. Firstly, is this the test better than age limit? We tell you that the age limit 18 is quite too arbitrary, and there are much more factors to decide if a person is eligible to vote or not. They say, oh, but it's a right, so let's make all of them vote. If it is a basic right, can they not keep their duty to give proper votes? We have continuously proved about the possible harms, but they are responding only about the rights when they deny the rights of the young people, which is very contradictory. Secondly, is the voting system discriminatory? There is a tension in the opposition bench because they said, but the test discriminates minorities when our speakers talked about what capacity tests will require. They also tell you that their age limit is okay, but we successfully rebutted that young people, if they have the capacity to vote, their opinion should be considered by the government too. We also proved why minorities will have more leverage when they have to write principles about politics and actually pass the test. Judicial judge, what you need to actually consider is about what makes a person eligible to make accurate decisions. Do you want a society when people make selfish decisions due to their ages, or a society when they care about their community genuinely? We believe that our side have proved some important points in today's debate, while the other team has focused on very minor parts with logic that does not matter, and they did not pay attention to our characterization. Judge, if you have Judge, because you have the right mind to prepare to decide which team has proved correctly, we believe that you should vote for our team. Thank you very much.